Hey guys, tonight we are going to uncover 15 shocking truths about Catherine de Medici, the woman once branded as the most terrifying poison queen of 16th century Europe. From a cold and lonely orphan childhood, through years of confinement in convents, to enduring humiliations from emperors and furious crowds, her life was a chain of tragedies, both dark and almost unbelievable. But these truths are not merely relics of the past. They will make you shiver, leave you astonished, and force you to ask, was the image of a ruthless queen truly accurate, or just the product of rumors passed down through the centuries? All of this has been distilled from chronicles, ancient manuscripts, and modern research to bring you a portrait that is both authentic and deeply controversial. Be sure to watch all 15 of these truths, because each detail may change the way you see Catherine, from a cursed figure into a human being forgotten by history. And if you notice any details that deserve correction or addition, feel free to leave a comment so that together we can complete this historical picture. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are watching this video from, and what time it is where you live, because perhaps we are sharing a historical moment that transcends time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And to begin this journey, let us turn back the clock to the very first days of Catherine's life. A beginning that might have seemed destined for the glory of the Medici name, yet in truth was marked by irreparable loss and sorrow. From that birthplace and those orphaned childhood years, seeds of pain and solitude took root shaping. A soul at once fragile and resilient, preparing her for the storms that would make her one of the most controversial figures in history. Picture this: Florence, Italy, on a misty April morning in the year 1519. Fog clings to the rooftops of an ancient city, a place where the name Medici meant power, wealth, and danger. And right there, a baby girl takes her very first breath. Yes, that's Catherine de Medici. But don't expect a fairy tale beginning, because tragedy was waiting from the very first heartbeat. Her mother died from postpartum fever, and just 15 days later, her powerful father was struck down by a cruel illness. The result? Baby Catherine, barely 1 month old, was already an orphan like a fragile flower torn away by the storm. Sounds unbearable for a child, doesn't it? But wait, it gets darker. Her aunt, Catherine de Medici, grandniece of Pope Clement VII, took her in and placed her in the convent of Santissima Annunziata. Now, imagine a 5-year-old girl waking each morning to the echo of bells, her tiny steps carrying her into the courtyard to pray. In the afternoons, instead of playing games, she quietly sketched frescoes on the walls, memorizing every classical pattern as though it were her only toy. The convent, with its soft hymns and flickering candlelight, became her entire world. And here comes the twist. Though technically a prisoner of political turmoil, Catherine would later recall those 3 years as the happiest of her life. Why? Because at least within those walls, she was spared the endless schemes and bloodshed tearing Florence apart. While the city boiled with battles and plots of overthrow, inside the convent, Catherine found fragile peace nurtured by prayer and the affection of her Aunt Clarice. Put yourself there for a moment. Outside, a stage of violence and betrayal. Inside, a lonely orphan clinging to fleeting serenity, as if God himself whispered, "Don't give up." And it was in these years that Catherine's strange duality was forged, fear of abandonment mixed with a resilience few could imagine. So tonight, as you drift deeper into this sleepy journey, picture Catherine resting her head on a cold stone floor, the convent bells lulling her pain away. This is only the very first chilling truth in the chain of 15 secrets that will keep you hooked. Trust me, the ones that follow will make your skin crawl even more. Terrifying fact 1. A political hostage and a stolen childhood. What if I told you that one of the most powerful women of 16th century Europe, Catherine de Medici, didn't start her life with gold, silk, or a throne, but with the invisible chains of captivity? Sounds like a Netflix drama, doesn't it? But it's the raw truth. Catherine's life began under a shadow of tragedy. By the time she was only 1 month old, she had already lost both her parents. Picture it, a newborn child left between 2 cold graves, as though fate had already drafted a heartbreaking script for her life. Though her Aunt Clarice raised her in the soft glow of convent candles and the gentle rhythm of bells, Catherine carried deep within her the fear of abandonment. But when she was just 8 or 9 years old, things spiraled into something far worse. Florence at the time was like a political pressure cooker, ready to explode at any moment. Enemies of the Medici family rose up, and who became their target? None other than young Catherine, a child too small to even grasp what politics meant. She became a hostage. Yes, a child hostage, passed around like a bargaining chip. From one convent to another, Catherine wasn't just an orphan anymore, she was a political commodity. Imagine her crouched behind a heavy wooden door, listening to the chaos outside, the shouting of soldiers, the pounding of hooves, the sharp clash of steel. Those sounds must have been like an endless nightmare on repeat. Now, put yourself in her shoes. 8 years old, no friends, no games, no parents' embrace. Only cold stone walls and the stern faces of monks. Catherine had to learn to survive by staying silent, hiding her emotions, and swallowing her fear whole. She was trained by circumstance to observe quietly, remember everything, and never reveal her weakness. There's even a chilling anecdote. During one rebellion, anti-Medici forces considered executing Catherine as a political message. Can you believe that? A child nearly dragged to the scaffold, simply for bearing the Medici name. But miraculously, she survived. And from that brush with death, she learned that in the world of power, humanity was a luxury. Even scarier, these years as a hostage shaped Catherine into a master observer. While you were playing with dolls at 8, Catherine was learning to read the flicker of her enemy's eyes, to spot fake smiles, to recognize poisonous promises. She discovered that silence could be a weapon, and endurance could be a form of power. So as you listen to this story, picture Catherine wide-eyed, gazing through a narrow window. Outside, swords glinted, horses screamed, and mobs roared. Inside, she could only whisper to herself, "Will I survive tomorrow?" Terrifying fact 2. The plot to strip, torture and rescue by Pope Clement VII. Can you imagine being not even 9 years old and already at the center of the most ruthless political plots of the 16th century? Sounds insane, but that was Catherine de Medici's reality. Florence in the year 1527 was a storm of chaos. The Medici family, once masters of the city's treasury and politics, was overthrown by furious rebels. And who became their most valuable prize? Little Catherine. Whispers spread that she was a witness of power, a living symbol of Medici rule, and so she was locked away in one convent after another, passed around like a political package, never knowing if tomorrow would be her last. But the cruelty escalated quickly. When the troops of Emperor Charles V besieged Florence on orders from Pope Clement VII, the rebels revealed just how merciless they could be. They didn't just want to topple the Medici, they wanted revenge. Their plan? Strip young Catherine naked in the public square, torture her in front of the crowd to disgrace her family, and perhaps even behead her to send a chilling message to their enemies. Now picture it. A pale, trembling child, surrounded by a screaming mob, her tearful eyes wide with terror as cold blades flashed all around her. Just thinking about it sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it? And yet, at the very brink of death, a miracle happened. Catherine's powerful uncle, Pope Clement VII, intervened. With an urgent decree, he ordered troops to rescue her from Florence's turmoil. Suddenly, the Vatican, once a distant legend of marble halls and candlelit prayers, became Catherine's new home. Imagine her at 10 years old, stepping through the heavy gates of the Vatican. Behind her, smoke, screams, the stench of war. Ahead of her, golden ceilings glittering with candlelight, choirs echoing through vast halls, rituals steeped in grandeur. But beneath the splendor, Catherine learned her first hard truth. Power is never pure. It is always tangled with schemes, bargains, and bloody secrets. The near brush with humiliation and death carved an unhealable scar into her soul. From that moment, as she heard the hiss of blades cutting through the air, Catherine understood. Survival in politics demanded more than luck. It demanded intelligence, patience, and a will of steel. Instead of destroying her, The ordeal fueled her with an unstoppable drive to live. Later she would recall, "I will never again allow myself to be a hostage to fate." Chilling, right? That vow marked the beginning of her education not in books, but in diplomacy, in deception, and in wielding words like weapons. Her three greatest qualities, patience, vigilance, and survival instinct, were born in that swamp of pain. So tonight, as you listen in this sleepy space, picture Catherine just 10 years old, walking shyly through the cold stone corridors of the Vatican, her eyes still shimmering with fear, but deep inside, a fire already lit. A fire that would one day transform her from an orphaned child into one of the most powerful and feared queens in European history. That is terrifying fact 2. From the threat of public stripping and torture to a last-minute rescue that led her into the Vatican, the first step on her bloody, calculated, and unforgettable path to becoming the infamous Poison Queen. Terrifying fact 3. Married at 14 to Henry II, and a decade of childlessness. Picture this, 14 years old, an age when most girls today would still be playing with dolls or daydreaming about school outings. Catherine de Medici was already walking down the aisle in one of Europe's grandest political alliances. In the year 1533, she married Henry, Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I and Queen Claude. The wedding was dazzling. Trumpets blared through Paris, candles flickered against silken armor, and every gaze was fixed on the tiny Italian bride. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? But behind the glittering curtain, tragedy crept in. After the wedding night, everyone expected Catherine to become pregnant quickly. Her mission wasn't romance, it was to produce heirs for the Valois line. But as months turned into years, no child appeared. Worse still, when Henry's elder brother Francis died in 1536, Henry suddenly became the heir to the throne. That meant Catherine now carried the crushing responsibility of continuing the royal bloodline. Yet 10 years passed, and her womb remained silent. In the French court, this was nearly a crime. Whispers swirled behind her back. Barren, a worthless princess, even a witch Medici. Imagine being a teenager, yet carrying not only your husband's disappointment, but the weight of an entire kingdom. Every step Catherine took through the vast palace echoed with judgment. Think about it. Each morning she awoke with fragile hope, only to sink into despair when nothing changed. Each afternoon she heard the laughter of handmaids with their infants, the lullabies drifting through corridors, while she sat quietly by a sunlit window, her hands clasped in silent longing. Catherine bore not only personal grief, but the expectation of a nation desperate for an heir. Henry, at first gentle, grew increasingly uneasy in his glances. In front of nobles, Catherine smiled with poise, showing the grace of a duchess. But behind closed doors, she wept into silk pillows, her crown light as air yet heavier than any weapon. Desperate, she turned to every cure she could find. Physicians prescribed herbs, alchemists offered strange concoctions, and even whispered folk rituals were attempted. Rumours spread that Catherine knelt before charms and incense, praying for supernatural aid. Far from sympathy, this only deepened the slander branding her as the orphan witch, a stain on her fragile dignity. And yet, here lies the twist. Those 10 barren years forged Catherine's steel. She did not collapse under shame. Instead, she sharpened her instincts, learning how to observe quietly, forge strategic friendships, and transform weakness into a mask that hid her iron will. Each time her heart raced in despair, she whispered to herself, "One day, I will turn this game around." So as you listen now, imagine Catherine barely 19 or 20 alone in a gilded chamber, tears glistening on her cheeks, but her eyes burning with defiance. Terrifying fact 3 was not only a marriage at 14 and a decade of bitter childlessness. It was the crucible that forged one of history's most formidable queens. And trust me, the next facts are even harsher, darker, and more unforgettable. Terrifying fact 4. Superstitious remedies. Drinking mule urine, cow dung, and the Black Queen. Epithet. Can you imagine this? A future queen, surrounded by gilded halls and golden ceilings, forced to drink mule urine? Sounds disgusting, right? But that's exactly what Catherine de Medici did in her desperation. Back then, people believed that mules, animals known to be infertile, carried an essence of barrenness. Drinking their urine, they thought, could somehow transfer that essence away, restoring fertility to the drinker. So Catherine, desperate to conceive, lifted the foul-smelling cup and drank, hoping it would unlock her womb. But it didn't stop there. On other occasions, she smeared herself with cow dung. The logic? Cows symbolized fertility and abundance, and by covering her body with their waste, she might absorb their life force. Horrifying as it sounds, in Catherine's mind, any chance, no matter how revolting, was better than none. She also crushed stag antlers into powder, mixing them with herbs and applying the paste to her skin. And when folk remedies failed, she turned to alchemists. They filled her chambers with smoke and chants, drawing strange symbols on the walls and brewing elixirs with names like Essence of Life. Once, during one of these ceremonies, Catherine collapsed from the fumes, fainting before her horrified attendants. Within hours, gossip swept through the palace. "The queen has been possessed." And how did the court react? Not kindly. They whispered that Catherine had made pacts with dark spirits, that she was a woman meddling with powers beyond human reach. In a society where female infertility was seen as a curse against life itself, Catherine's experiments made her the perfect target. Soon she was branded with a name that stuck for centuries: the Black Queen. But here's the twist, you'll like this one. That insult became her armor. Once people believed she commanded dark forces, they feared her. Diplomats thought twice before plotting against her, terrified of supernatural vengeance as much as political fallout. Fear itself became Catherine's silent weapon. Illustrations spread through manuscripts, depicting her in dark gowns, hands lifted in cryptic gestures, eyes burning with uncanny intensity. These images weren't Catherine the woman, they were Catherine the legend, a queen whose power, people believed, came from the shadows. Yet behind closed doors, Catherine remained calm. She carefully recorded her attempts in the margins of her journals. Dates, remedies, outcomes. Each failure didn't break her. It fueled her determination. If reason and science had failed, she would chase even the strangest possibilities. To Catherine, despair didn't mean surrender. It meant trying again, with more resolve. So as you drift deeper into this sleepy tale, picture Catherine by candlelight, lifting a crude cup of mule urine to her lips, her heart racing with fragile hope. Picture her body smeared with cow dung, the acrid smell filling her chambers, while smoky incense curled around the alchemical symbols scrawled on her walls. Even the stone halls of Fontainebleau seemed to hold their breath, waiting. That is terrifying fact 4. Catherine de Medici's plunge into bizarre superstitions, her body a battlefield for rituals that shocked her court and gave birth to her enduring nickname, the Black Queen. And trust me, the horrors yet to come are even darker, stranger, and impossible to look away from. Terrifying fact 5. The discovery of infertility's cause. Dr. Jean Fernel and the miracle named Prince Francis. Think about this. One of the French court's darkest mysteries wasn't solved by potions or charms, but by medical instructions on posture. Strange but true, and it saved Catherine de Medici's destiny. After 10 barren years and endless whispers calling her the Medici witch, Catherine was given another chance. King Francis I, weary of scandal and gossip, summoned Jean Fernel, the court physician famed for rejecting superstition and embracing science. Picture Fernel entering the palace, pen in hand, eyes sharp as a scalpel, uninterested in charms or herbs. He observed Henry, the heir to the throne, and immediately noticed something odd. Henry's gait was stiff, his blood seemed sluggish. After careful analysis, Fernel concluded that the issue wasn't Catherine at all, but Henry. A congenital defect made intimacy difficult, nearly impossible. Here's where it gets fascinating. Instead of prescribing potions, Fernel recommended mechanics. He laid out precise positions, angles and rhythms, a delicate choreography to bypass Henry's limitation. Catherine, exhausted by bizarre remedies like mule urine and cow dung, clung to this glimmer of rational hope. Henry, though embarrassed, agreed. The French crown depended on it. Now imagine this. Nights at Fontainebleau became Catherine and Henry's private laboratory. Candlelight flickered across the tapestries, their shadows dancing like partners in a secret ritual. At first it was awkward, Catherine trembling with cautious hope, Henry struggling through discomfort. But gradually, they gained confidence. Courtiers whispered, "The queen no longer seeks witches. This time she trusts science." And then, the miracle. On the 19th of January, 1544, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Francis. His first cry echoed like a trumpet blast announcing triumph, wiping away a decade of shame. The palace sighed in relief. Catherine, once dismissed as ordinary, was now the mother of France's heir. Think about it. The Valois fleur-de-lis, long a symbol of fertility, bloomed with new brilliance. For Catherine, this child was more than an heir. It was proof that she was not cursed, not barren, but capable of carrying the dynasty's future. And the miracle didn't stop there. Catherine bore 9 more children, 5 of whom survived to secure the Valois line. A throne that once wavered on the edge of extinction now stood firm. From then on, Catherine was no longer merely the whispered Black Queen. She became the mother of kings, a queen whose legacy was sealed by resilience, determination, and the insight of a doctor who trusted reason over superstition. So as you listen now, picture Catherine pale but radiant after childbirth, cradling her newborn son in trembling arms, her eyes gleaming with triumph. That is terrifying fact 5, the discovery of infertility's true cause and the miracle named Prince Francis. A fact that not only saved Catherine's honor, but reshaped the destiny of a kingdom. Terrifying fact 6, humiliation at court and the Nostradamus connection. What if I told you that in the glittering French court, Catherine de Medici, the rightful queen, was sidelined, while her husband's mistress held the second throne? Shocking, right? Yet this was Catherine's bitter reality, one of the deepest humiliations of her life. Her husband, Henry II, openly adored Diane de Poitiers, a woman 19 years his senior. 19! Diane was showered with gifts that should have been Catherine's. Diamond rings, the Chateau de Tournelles, titles of influence. Everyone in court knew Diane held more sway over the king than Catherine did. The queen was reduced to what courtiers cruelly called a birthing machine, valued only for securing heirs to the Valois line. Every jousting tournament was a stage for Catherine's pain. Henry would run to embrace Diane in front of blazing torches, while foreign ambassadors carefully recorded the scandal. Imagine Catherine, sitting there, forced to smile as Europe watched her humiliation. The cruelest irony? Diane herself urged Henry to spend time with Catherine so the queen might produce more heirs. Imagine the sting. The rival who displaced her in love became the facilitator of her dynastic duty. Meanwhile, whispers grew louder. How could a woman once barren for 10 years suddenly bear child after child? Surely, sorcery was at play. Thus the Black Queen epithet spread further, painting Catherine's power as rooted in pacts with dark forces rather than royal decree. Enter Michel de Nostradam, better known as Nostradamus. Catherine invited him to the Tuileries to cast horoscopes for her children. By candlelight, he delivered cryptic prophecies, including the chilling verse about a young lion overcoming the old in combat, later tied to Henry's fatal joust. What began as astrology became evidence, in her enemies' eyes, of occult ties. Fueling the legend were tales of the so-called Riri brothers, mysterious figures said to perform necromantic rites in the Tuileries gardens at midnight. Witnesses swore candles burned blue and strange tongues echoed against palace walls. Soon, the Tuileries gained a sinister reputation as the Queen's haunted stronghold. And so Catherine's image split in two, a humiliated wife, publicly scorned by her husband's mistress, and a feared sorceress, rumoured to summon unseen forces. Across Europe the story spread. A queen cloaked not just in sorrow but in shadows and prophecy. Terrifying fact 7. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre and the Poisoned Gloves Conspiracy. Can you believe that one morning turned Paris into a sea of blood? It sounds like horror fiction, but it's history. On the 23rd of August, 1572, just 2 days after the failed assassination of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, Paris exploded in violence now remembered as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Picture it. Catholic mobs surged through churches and homes, upending altars, cutting down anyone they found. From infants in cradles to the frail elderly, no one was spared. The cries of the dying mingled with the metallic scent of blood, transforming Paris into a nightmare. By the time it ended, over 3,000 were dead in Paris alone. And across the kingdom, The toll climbed into tens of thousands. And who was blamed? Catherine de Medici. Already branded the Black Queen, she was accused of masterminding the slaughter. Spanish ambassadors spread chilling tales. Catherine, they claimed, stood on the Tuileries balcony, her lips curled into a cold smile as corpses were thrown into the Seine. That image, a queen smiling above rivers of blood, burned itself into Europe's imagination. But the horror didn't stop there. Soon came another sinister rumour, the poisoned gloves conspiracy. Months earlier, before the wedding of Catherine's daughter Margaret to Henry of Navarre, a union meant to reconcile Catholics and Protestants, the Queen of Navarre, Jeanne d'Albret, suddenly died. The story went that she perished after wearing a new pair of gloves purchased in Paris. Whispers flew. Catherine ordered the gloves laced with poison, striking at the Protestant cause before the wedding could even unite them. The irony is cruel. A wedding gift meant as a symbol of goodwill became a symbol of betrayal. No evidence ever surfaced, but fear doesn't wait for evidence. Pamphlets depicted delicate gloves dripping with venom. Writers warned that in Catherine's France, even a gesture of kindness could kill. Now imagine this. In a candlelit bridal chamber, a bride slips her hands into silken gloves, believing them tokens of celebration only to feel betrayal burning through her veins. Outside, wedding music played. Inside, nobles whispered in panic, "Who will be next?" And here lies the true terror. Though unproven, the poisoned gloves etched themselves into collective memory. Catherine was feared not only for armies and decrees, but for the belief she could turn the simplest gift into a deadly weapon. Terrifying fact 8. Punishing her daughter and the flying squadron of spies. Think Catherine reserved her ruthlessness only for political enemies? Think again. Even her own daughter felt the sharp edge of her cold resolve. Margaret, Princess of Valois, fell into an affair with a Protestant noble named d'Albret. Romantic? Maybe. But in Catherine's eyes, it was unforgivable betrayal. Picture this. Guards storming the shadowed corridors of the palace, seizing d'Albret before he even knew what had happened. Escorted silently through the halls, he vanished forever. No trial, no outcry, just silence. Whispers soon spread. He had been executed on Catherine's orders. And Margaret? Her tears found no sympathy. Catherine stripped her of titles, disinherited her, and sent her into exile at the fortress of Écouen. There, the once glittering princess lived on a meagre allowance, barely enough to survive. Catherine had proven she was not simply a mother, she was a steel queen, ready to sever even blood ties to protect the Valois name. But Catherine's cruelty was matched by her cunning. Out of her relentless need for control, she created a weapon more subtle yet just as formidable. La Bande Volonté, the flying squadron. This wasn't an army of armoured knights. Number. Catherine assembled dozens of beautiful women from across Europe, training them as soldiers of seduction. They mastered conversation, charm, manipulation, and above all, the art of extracting secrets. Now imagine a grand ball, golden candlelight, music swelling, nobles dancing with abandon. Among them drift Catherine's flying squadron radiant beauties, whose laughter was as sharp as daggers. A glance, a coy smile, a whisper at just the right moment, and suddenly, state secrets slipped from careless lips. A general bragging about troop movements. A courtier boasting of conspiracies while entranced by a jeweled necklace. By dawn, those whispers were delivered directly to Catherine herself. The flying squadron turned the palace into a web of illusions. Every handshake, every flirtation, every lingering gaze was a trap. Catherine didn't need spies in shadows, she had spies in silk gowns, dazzling her enemies into giving themselves away. Contrast this. On one side, Margaret, her daughter, pacing alone along Écout's cold battlements, punished for love. On the other, Catherine's glamorous network of women, weaponizing beauty to undermine rivals. This was the essence of Catherine's dark genius, wielding both whip and velvet, cruelty and charm, exile and espionage. So as you listen now, picture two scenes. In Écouen, Margaret wrapped in sorrow, her footsteps echoing on lonely stone. In Paris, a glittering masquerade, where the flying squadron glides across the dance floor, gathering secrets with every smile. And in the shadows behind it all sits Catherine watching, waiting, pulling the strings. Terrifying fact 9. Machiavelli's book and the policy of reconcile, then repress. Ever wondered where a queen learned the art of ruling? Not from sermons, not from saints. Catherine de Medici carried with her a very different kind of manual. Niccolo Machiavelli's Il Principe, the Prince, a gift once given to her father. Picture Catherine by candlelight, bent over the worn pages of this book. Each passage taught her something sharp-edged. To seize power by appearing as a friend first, then striking when trust was secured. Cold, yes, but it worked. Time and again, Catherine toppled rivals with blades they never saw coming. Yet she wasn't all steel and daggers. She knew when to soften her hand. In 1562, Catherine issued the Edict of Saint-Germain, shocking Europe. It allowed Huguenots to worship in certain towns and even hold public office. As regent and mother of France, Catherine gathered both Catholics and Protestants, urging them to embrace peace as our guiding star. For a fleeting moment, at Fontainebleau, hymns of both faiths mingled, and unity seemed possible. But the shadow of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre soon returned. Within years, reconciliation unravelled. Catherine reversed course. New edicts forbade Protestant worship, expelled preachers, and dispatched armed patrols to crush heresy. This U-turn enraged both sides. Hardline Catholics called her weak forever tolerating heretics. Protestants felt utterly betrayed. Neither side offered lasting loyalty. The policy of reconcile then repress became a bitter lesson. Mix too many ingredients, and the potion curdles. Imagine it. In a hushed council chamber, Catherine signs a fresh edict, the quill scratching like a death sentence. Across France, in shuttered Huguenot chapels, families weep as their pastors are led away. Hands that once clasped in fellowship now grip swords instead. Here lies Catherine's paradoxical genius. She knew hope could disarm and fear could dominate. By first promising tolerance, she lulled allies and enemies alike. Then, by enforcing repression, she reasserted absolute authority. It was pure Machiavelli brought to life. So as your eyelids grow heavy, picture Catherine at her desk, Il Principe open beside her, its margins marked with her notes. She nods slowly at a passage on political flexibility, then drafts her decree. The palace walls themselves seem to lean closer, remembering both the fragile peace and the blood-soaked aftermath. Terrifying fact 10. The decline of the Valois and a conflicted cultural legacy. So here we are. My friend, you've followed Catherine de Medici through poisons, massacres, betrayals, and midnight seances. But now, we arrive at the twilight of her story. And let me tell you, this final chapter is a cocktail of heartbreak and beauty, cruelty and culture, all stirred together in the strangest of goblets. After the audacious plots against the Duke of Guise and the heartbreaking death of King Henry III in 1573, the once mighty Valois dynasty finally cracked. Imagine it. A family line that had ruled France for generations, collapsing like a house of cards. Catherine, the woman who had fought tooth and nail, who had schemed with spies and outmaneuvered kings, watched as the crown slipped right out of her family's grasp. Can you feel that sting? To spend your life pulling the strings, only to see the puppet theatre burn to the ground? In the aftermath, Catherine retreated into the Tuileries Palace. No more grand parades of power, no more dazzling councils with dukes and cardinals. Instead, she lived out her last years in quiet seclusion. Picture her there. A woman once called the Black Queen, now cloaked not in menace, but in silence. The walls that had echoed with commands and conspiracies now absorbed only whispers of regret. And yet here's the twist, her cultural legacy refused to die. In fact, it blossomed. Catherine, ever the Italian at heart, poured her fading energy into beauty. She transformed the Tuileries gardens into something extraordinary. Rows of plane trees perfectly aligned, fountains murmuring in the breeze, and parterres shaped into elegant geometric patterns. Think of it as her way of saying, if I can't control men, I'll at least control the flowers. And honestly, she did. Those gardens became her refuge, a living canvas where she could reflect on everything she had gained and everything she had lost. Inside the palace, Catherine's love for the arts thrived. The court she once used as weapons of influence now pulsed with music. She shifted from the Italian madrigals she adored to the French choral works of composers like Antoine de Saint-Saëns and Cipriano de Rore. Imagine walking those candlelit halls, the harmonies floating through the air like a balm, lulling even the most anxious courtier into a dream. Catherine's patronage ensured that, even as France tore itself apart with religious wars, its artistic soul burned brighter than ever. And oh, the food! Catherine left her mark on French cuisine too. Her court chefs, like Francesco Corte, were innovators. They gave France delicate onion soups, refined pâtés, and an entire style of cooking that eventually evolved into haute cuisine. Think about it. Every time you hear someone gush about classic French cooking, you're tasting Catherine's vision. It's wild to think that the same woman accused of poisoning rivals also laid the groundwork for croissants and crème brûlée. Talk about a legacy with bite. As a mother, Catherine's devotion endured even when her children broke her heart. She commissioned paintings, poems, and monuments to honour Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III. She built libraries filled with rare manuscripts, books on medicine, philosophy, astronomy, so that knowledge could survive even if her dynasty didn't. Can you see the paradox? She orchestrated death on the battlefield and massacres in the streets, but she also safeguarded art and wisdom for future generations. And that's Catherine in a nutshell, a paradox. To some, she was the villainess of Europe, the Black Queen, who smiled as Paris drowned in Protestant blood. To others, she was the Renaissance mother who gave France its gardens, its music, its haute cuisine, its libraries. Which Catherine do you believe in? The ruthless schemer or the cultural saviour? Maybe both. Maybe that's what makes her so terrifying, because she was never just one thing. Now, I want you to close your eyes and picture this. The Tuileries Gardens at dusk. Leaves rustle gently in the evening air. Fountains glimmer in the fading light. In a nearby hall, faint echoes of a courtly dance drift through, mingling with the clink of silverware from a banquet that's long since ended. This is Catherine's last gift to the world. A legacy of contradictions, where cruelty and compassion walked side by side, hand in hand. Terrifying fact 11. Becoming the Black Witch through superstition. All right, lean in for this one because things are about to get weird. You've heard the tales of poison, massacres, and backroom plotting. But did you know that Catherine de Medici, the queen who shaped France's destiny, once literally bathed herself in cow dung? Yeah, you heard me right. Cow. Dung. And that was just the start. Picture it. Catherine, desperate after a decade of barren marriage, clutching at the wildest cures her age could conjure. First, mule urine. Why mule urine? Because mules were famously infertile, and some twisted logic of the 16th century said that their sterile essence could somehow unlock her womb. Imagine her, gagging at the rim of a cup, lips pressed tight, trying to convince herself that this foul drink might give her a son. But it didn't stop there. Court servants whispered about how Catherine smeared fresh cow dung across her skin, hoping that the vitality of the earth would seep through her pores. She had stag antlers ground into a paste, pressed hot against her body, as if antler dust could spark fertility. And to top it all off, she summoned alchemists and folk healers into her chambers, where they burned herbs and resins until the air choked with acrid smoke. Candles flickered, chants echoed, and there stood Catherine, eyes closed, praying for a miracle in the fumes. More than once, she collapsed mid-ritual, half-conscious on the marble floor, while physicians rushed in, horrified, to see their queen at the mercy of superstition. Now, keep in mind, this was the 16th century, the golden age of witch hunts. All across Europe, women accused of infertility or odd rituals were dragged into public squares and condemned as witches. So, you can imagine how Catherine's bizarre remedies looked to the outside world. Letters flew from Paris to Rome, full of scandal. Courtiers snickered behind fans. Ambassadors scribbled reports dripping with gossip. And slowly, a legend was born. Catherine wasn't just a queen, she was the Black Witch of France. Whispers claimed she had bargained with demons, that she summoned shadows with her right hand, that her throne itself rested on unholy rites. To the common people, she was no longer the grieving queen desperate for children. No, she became a figure of dread, a woman cloaked in darkness, lurking behind the glittering veil of Renaissance court life. But here's the thing, and this is where you've got to lean in even closer. The superstition wasn't just about power. It was about pain. Catherine's experiments with mule urine and cow dung weren't the antics of a woman hungry for dark magic. They were the desperate attempts of a mother-in-waiting, tormented by her body's betrayal. Imagine lying awake night after night in a gilded bedchamber, haunted not by demons, but by the silence of no child's cry. Each morning she woke in her jeweled gown, shoulders weighed down not by velvet but by failure, and in that misery, being feared almost felt better than being pitied. Yet, out of this darkness came something remarkable. Catherine began to see through the smoke, literally. Behind closed doors, she started turning away from folk healers and quack alchemists. She studied medicine in secret. She consulted reputable physicians, read through treatises on anatomy and physiology, and scribbled her own notes in the margins. Gone were the cow dung pastes. In came carefully measured herbs. She learned the importance of diet, of hygiene, of rational treatment. Slowly, superstition gave way to science. So now, picture Catherine again, but not in a haze of foul smoke. Instead, she's at her writing desk, quill in hand, a leather-bound medical book open before her. The candles that once burned for occult rituals are now nearly spent, their smoke curling up as if retreating in shame. She bends low, marking passages, determined to wrest control of her body through knowledge, not fantasy. The legend of the Black Witch would never die, of course. For generations, terrified courtiers whispered of Catherine's supposed pacts with the devil. To this day, her name gets tangled up with poison, sorcery, and shadowy arts. But the truth is far more human and far more haunting. She wasn't a witch. She was a woman clawing at every remedy, no matter how grotesque, in the face of crushing duty and personal despair. And that's the terrifying paradox, isn't it? That beneath the myth of Catherine the Black Witch, there was simply Catherine the Queen who learned that fear could be a shield, superstition, a mask, and knowledge the only weapon that would endure. So, as you drift deeper into this story, imagine Catherine not as a sorceress stirring cauldrons, but as a lonely woman at her desk, chasing hope line by line through a medical text. Her enemies saw a witch. History remembers a queen. But in that moment, by the dim light of dying candles, she was something else entirely, a human being, desperate, afraid, and finally enlightened. Terrifying fact 12. Entertaining Nostradamus, horoscopes and the shadows of the future. Okay, buckle up, because this next one feels like a Netflix crossover between House of Cards and Stranger Things. You've heard about Catherine the Schemer, Catherine the Black Queen, but now we're stepping into the candlelit corridors of prophecy itself. And yes, our star guest is none other than the man, the myth, the quatrain machine, Nostradamus. Here's the setup. Catherine de Medici had already been accused of dabbling in poisons, talismans, and cow dung facials. Yep, we've been there. So when whispers of witchcraft threatened to drown her political image, did she back off? Did she tone it down? Absolutely not. She doubled down, but with a twist. Instead of back-alley alchemists, she summoned Michel de Nostradam, better known to history as Nostradamus, to the glittering halls of the Tuileries Palace. Now, imagine this scene with me. The Queen's private study is bathed in flickering candlelight. Heavy velvet curtains block out the moon. On the table, parchment scrolls, astrological charts, and inkpots are scattered like weapons of the unseen world. Enter Nostradamus. Gaunt, intense, his eyes shadowed with secrets he probably hasn't told a soul. Catherine gestures for him to sit, her face unreadable but her hands gripping the armrests just a little too tightly. She wants answers not just for France, but for the children who carry the fragile Valois name. And here's the kicker. Nostradamus unrolls his charts and begins murmuring verses. One quatrain in particular chills the room. The young lion shall overcome the old upon the field of combat. His golden eyes shall be pierced. Sound familiar? It should. That cryptic line foreshadowed the fatal jousting accident that would kill Catherine's husband, King Henry II. The image of a shattered lance driving through the king's visor? Yeah, the prophecy nailed it. Picture Catherine in that moment. Her candle sputters as Nostradamus's finger slides across the parchment, tracing words that feel like daggers. She leans closer, her quill scratching furious notes in the margins. Behind her composed exterior, her mind races. Was this man seeing fate itself? Or did he simply have a genius for predicting how fragile power really was? Either way, Catherine understood something crucial. This was not just fortune-telling. This was psychological warfare. Because here's the real trick. Once those horoscopes spread beyond her study, they caught fire in the French court. Nobles whispered in corners. Ambassadors sent coded reports to foreign kings. And everyone began asking the same terrifying question. What if the stars are against me? And in that uncertainty, Catherine thrived. She didn't need to swing a sword. She didn't need to shout. All she had to do was let Nostradamus's riddles hang in the air, twisting into the minds of her enemies until they second-guessed their every move. Think about it. Every new quatrain became a ghostly dagger hanging overhead. Would the next one predict betrayal? Death? A rebellion gone wrong? Catherine knew that fear of the unknown was the sharpest blade of all. By aligning herself with the mystique of prophecy, she made herself untouchable. Even the hardest general hesitated before crossing her because, well, what if the stars said no? And yet, and this is where the story hits you in the gut, it wasn't all about power. For Catherine, Nostradamus wasn't just a tool. He was also a comfort. Remember, she had been an orphan, a pawn, a woman mocked for years as barren. Her life was one long parade of tragedy and suspicion. In those cryptic verses, she found something that looked like order, maybe even hope. If the heavens had written her destiny, then at least she wasn't lost in the chaos. At least the pain meant something. So here's what I want you to imagine. It's midnight in the Tuileries. The air is heavy with incense. Nostradamus's voice rises and falls, each word like a drumbeat of fate. Catherine sits at her desk, her hand trembling slightly as she writes annotations in the margins of his quatrains. Outside the chamber, courtiers pause mid-step, unwilling to interrupt what feels like an otherworldly séance. The walls themselves seem to breathe, as if prophecy has made the palace alive. And in that moment, Catherine isn't just the queen, or the widow, or the mother desperate for heirs. She's something more dangerous. A woman wielding fear, faith, and the unknown as weapons sharper than any blade. Terrifying fact 13. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. A laughter amid a sea of blood. Okay, this is the one where history gets so dark you almost want to look away. Almost. Because if you do, you miss the moment that sealed Catherine de Medici's reputation forever. It's the night of August 23rd, 1572. Paris sleeps uneasily after the attempted assassination of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the Huguenot leader. You can feel the tension in the air, like static before a thunderstorm, and then it breaks. At dawn, the city erupts. Fanatical Catholic mobs swarm through narrow alleys, churches, and town squares. Doors are smashed open, altars overturned. Men, women, and children dragged, screaming into the streets. The massacre doesn't discriminate. Infants in cradles, frail elders, newlyweds, it doesn't matter. Blades slash, hammers fall, and Paris drowns in blood. Bodies float down the Seine, bumping against its stone banks. Others hang from bridges, swaying grotesquely as the crowd below jeers. By the time the frenzy ebbs, 3,000 are dead in Paris alone, tens of thousands across France. And here's the image that haunts the centuries. Catherine de Medici, standing on a balcony of the Tuileries Palace. Spanish ambassadors swore they saw her. Her gaze was cold, detached, watching the slaughter unfold as if she was surveying a grotesque theatre. And then the detail no one can forget, her lips curled, and she laughed. A soft, chilling chuckle carried on the smoky dawn air. Now, was it true? Did she actually laugh? Or was it propaganda? Another smear designed to turn Europe against the Black Queen? That's the debate. No letter, no edict, no eyewitness account beyond ambassador reports proves she ordered the killing. Yet once the story spread, once the vision of Catherine laughing while rivers of blood coursed through Paris lodged in the public imagination, it didn't matter. The myth stuck. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Just 10 years earlier, Catherine had signed the Edict of Saint-Germain, granting Protestants limited freedom of worship. She had positioned herself as a peacemaker, a mother of compromise in a fractured kingdom. But on that August morning, whatever hope had existed went up in smoke. Whether she orchestrated it, condoned it, or simply stood powerless, the massacre became her legacy. And the supposed laugh? It was the nail in the coffin. Think about it. Power has its own soundtrack. Sometimes it's the roar of the crowd. Sometimes the clink of a goblet at a banquet. But here, it was the sound of a queen's laugh. Just one moment of mirth, real or imagined, that turned her into the midwife of genocide in the eyes of Europe. So let me leave you with this picture as you sink deeper into the quiet of night. The tormented cries of Paris echo faintly in the distance. Smoke rises over rooftops. And on a gilded balcony, Catherine's silhouette stands tall. The mist curls around her shoulders. Then, breaking the heavy silence, comes that laugh, sharp, unexpected, unforgettable. A sound that slices through history itself. Terrifying fact 14. The poisoned gloves. Conspiracy. The deadly pair of gloves. Okay, picture this with me. It's the eve of a royal wedding. Everyone's buzzing with anticipation. Silk gowns swishing, chandeliers dripping light. The scent of roses heavy in the corridors. The marriage of Catherine de Medici's daughter Margaret to Henry of Navarre is supposed to be a glittering union, one of those peace in our time kind of deals. But instead of a honeymoon, history whispers about something far darker. A pair of gloves. Yes, gloves. Not a dagger, not a musket, not even poison in a goblet of wine. Just a delicate, embroidered pair of gloves. And yet, this is where the legend of Catherine as the Poison Queen digs its claws deep. Here's how the story goes. Catherine sends Jeanne d'Albret, Henry of Navarre's formidable mother, a gift. These luxurious, custom-fitted gloves, velvet, lined and stitched with the royal crest. A symbol of goodwill, right? Jeanne slips them on, probably smiling at the thought that the Queen herself was extending a hand of peace. But hours later she's stricken, her hands blister, her body weakens. By nightfall she can barely breathe, and before the dawn can break, Jeanne is gone dead in her bedchamber, the gloves still fresh in memory. Now, was it really poison? Was it some cruel sleight of hand by Catherine? Here's the twist. No autopsy, no formal inquiry, no definitive proof was ever offered. But in the vacuum of fact, rumour thrives. And boy did it thrive. Pamphlets flew across Paris, sketching images of blood-stained gloves abandoned on tables. Engravings showed shadowy queens smirking in the background. The whispers turned into a roar. Catherine had weaponized fashion itself. And that's what made this story so terrifying. Because in a world where everyone expected battlefields, assassins, and duels, the idea that death could slip onto your fingers silky, elegant, unsuspecting, was worse than any sword. Courtiers began eyeing gifts suspiciously. Ordinary Parisians muttered that even ribbons or trinkets might conceal a queen's vengeance. Trust itself became fragile. For Catherine, that's the genius of the plot, whether she planned it or not. A pair of gloves doesn't just kill, it kills certainty. It poisons not only the victim, but the entire atmosphere of a court. Who could shake hands without wondering? Who could unwrap a gift without fear? The gloves weren't just leather. They were paranoia stitched into every seam. And here's where I want you to zoom in. Imagine Jean's chamber. Silk sheets rustling as she gasps for air. A bridal march echoing faintly in the distance, cut short by the weight of suspicion. Outside, courtiers glance at each other nervously, every gift box suddenly suspect. And then, somewhere else in the palace, Catherine sits at her desk. The gloves empty, harmless looking draped across polished wood. The candlelight flickers. Her expression? Calm. Maybe even amused. Because no matter the truth, the legend works in her favor. Terrifying fact 15. Punishing daughter Margaret. A severance of blood ties. All right. You thought Catherine was ruthless with rivals and rebels, right? But hold on, because this next twist proves she could be just as merciless with her own blood. And when I say blood, I mean her daughter. Yep, buckle in, this is going to sting. Margaret of Valois, Catherine's third daughter, wasn't just another princess in the background. She was adored across the court for her wit, her charm, and beauty that turned heads at every banquet. But where there's glamour, there's always gossip. And whispers soon reached Catherine's ears. Margaret had been secretly meeting a Protestant nobleman named Dolpelet. You can practically hear Catherine's sharp intake of breath when she learned the news. It wasn't just scandal. It was treason wrapped in romance. Catherine didn't hesitate. Orders went out in silence. One night, Dolpolet was seized inside the very walls of the palace. Imagine it. Echoing corridors, torchlight flickering, boots pounding against stone as guards dragged him away. No trial, no farewell. Just a cell, a blade, and a silence that swallowed him whole. By morning, the man Margaret loved was dead, erased as neatly as ink blotted off parchment. But Catherine wasn't finished. At dawn, she stood face to face with her daughter. No warmth, no motherly comfort. Instead, in that cold, steady voice that froze courtiers in their tracks, she stripped Margaret of her titles, her birthright, her dignity. Then came the exile, a one-way trip to the fortress of Ekwan. Think about that, stone walls crumbling, icy drafts sneaking through broken windows, and a stipend so tiny it could barely buy bread. From jewels and gowns to threadbare solitude, all in a single decree. Now here's the part that really chills me. Catherine told her outright, "The realm must stand above loyalty of blood." That's it. No apologies. No hesitation. Just the raw creed of a queen who saw even her children as pawns on the chessboard of power. And in that moment, the illusion of Catherine as a mother dissolved. She wasn't mom anymore, she was monarch. Picture Margaret at Ekwan, pacing narrow corridors, the wind screaming through the fortress like a ghost. Nights spent pressing her cheek against cold stone, whispering her mother's name not in hope, but in grief. Meanwhile, back in the Tuileries, Catherine sat in her chambers, the candlelight flickering against a portrait of her daughter. And though her marble face showed no cracks, you know the weight was there. Those painted eyes staring back at her must have felt like accusations that never stopped. And yet here's the logic of power. To Catherine, sentiment was weakness. Letting Margaret's affair slide could unravel the dynasty she had spent her entire life clawing to protect. By cutting off her daughter, she sent a brutal but crystal-clear message to everyone watching. In Catherine's world, not even family ties could shield you. Cross her, and you'd lose everything, whether you were a duke, a commoner, or her own child. So, as you let your eyes drift closed, imagine this. Margaret's lonely figure in Ekwan, her footsteps echoing in endless corridors of stone, and far away, Catherine, seated before her candle, steady as marble, her face unreadable but her heart, maybe haunted, maybe hollow. That's the price of a crown forged in blood. Through today's video, you can clearly see that Catherine de Medici was not only a controversial figure in history, but also a mirror reflecting the complexity of power and humanity. From the terrifying facts we have just uncovered together, the audience receives more than just tales of bloodshed, intrigue, or witchcraft rumors. What we truly witness is the fragility of the human condition when confronted with ambition, fear, and the unimaginable pressures of history. The message this video delivers is that power, if not tempered by kindness and justice, can transform a person into a symbol of fear. Catherine was once regarded as the poison queen or the black witch, yet behind it all she was still a woman carrying deep pain, yearning for love, and struggling to protect her family. Her story reminds us that sometimes the very choices born from fear can become the root of great tragedies. In modern life, this lesson remains just as valuable. Each of us will face moments of pressure, forced to make important decisions. There will be times when fear or anger may guide your actions. But if you allow negative emotions to take control, the outcome is often regret. Catherine's story is a reminder. Stay clear-headed. Do not let fear rule you, but let compassion and reason lead the way. That is true strength. And now, before you close tonight's journey, let me remind you. Finally, I wish you a truly peaceful night's sleep. If you are still awake, may these stories lull you into gentle dreams. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, so you will not miss the newest and best videos we have prepared for you. Good night, and see you again in the next video.